love, pain, truth.
It was a Tuesday morning that started like any other at the small airfield. The sun had just climbed over the tree line, burning off the thin layer of fog that clung to the runway. The smell of aviation fuel and old grease hung in the air inside the hangar. This place wasn't fancy. It was a working man's shop, with oil stains on the concrete floor and tools hanging on pegboards that had seen better days. The only mechanic on site that day was a black man in his mid-30s. He was a single father, raising a little girl on his own after her mother had passed away 2 years before. Every morning, he dropped his daughter off at his own mother's house before heading to work. Every evening, he picked her up, helped with homework, made dinner, and read her a bedtime story. He didn't complain. He just got the job done, both at home and in the hangar. He had been working at this airfield for nearly 8 years. He knew every bolt, every wire, every engine that came through those big metal doors. Pilots trusted him. The old owner, a gray-haired man who had started the business from nothing, used to say that this mechanic had a gift. He hears things in an engine that most people can't, the old man would tell customers. He's the best pair of hands in 3 counties. But the old owner had retired 6 months ago. He sold the business to a retired corporate executive named Crane. Crane had made his money in packaging and shipping. He didn't know a spark plug from a fuel filter, but he knew how to read a spreadsheet. And that was the problem. From the first week, Crane started asking questions. "Why does an inspection take 4 hours?" he would say, standing in the doorway of the hangar with his hands on his hips. "My numbers say it should take 2. The mechanic tried to explain. He talked about federal safety rules, about the difference between a visual check and a full diagnostic, about the lives that depended on these machines staying in the air. But Crane didn't want to hear it. He wanted faster turnaround. He wanted lower costs. He wanted higher profit margins. The mechanic refused to cut corners. Every time Crane suggested skipping a step, the mechanic would look him straight in the eye and say, "That's not how we do things here. Not if you want people to walk away from their landings." For a while, they reached an uneasy truce. Crane stopped coming into the hangar as often. He stayed in his office, staring at his computer screen. The mechanic kept working the way he always had, slow and careful, the way his father had taught him back when he was a teenager learning to rebuild old car engines. But the tension never really went away. It sat under the surface like a crack in a cylinder head. You couldn't see it, but you knew it was there. And one day, it was going to blow. That day arrived on a Tuesday. The mechanic came in at 6 in the morning, same as always. He made coffee in the old machine that had been in the break room for 15 years. He walked through the hangar, checking the schedule on the whiteboard. 2 planes needed oil changes. One had a rough idle that needed diagnosing. A helicopter from a nearby hospital was due in for a routine rotor inspection later in the week. He was about to pull the first plane into the service bay when Crane appeared at the hangar door. The owner was holding a clipboard and wearing a look that the mechanic had learned to recognize. It was the look of someone about to start a fight. "We need to talk," Crane said. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag and followed him into the small office. The room smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. A fan in the corner made a soft clicking noise as it turned. Crane didn't offer him a seat. He just started talking. He said the numbers weren't working. He said the mechanic was too slow. He said he had heard from a pilot that the mechanic had refused to sign off on a plane the week before because of some minor vibration that no one else could feel. That plane had a bad engine mount, the mechanic said calmly. "I showed you the crack myself. It would have failed at takeoff." Crane waved his hand like he was shooing away a fly. "That's not the point. The point is you're not a team player. You think you know better than everyone else. You think the rules don't apply to you." The mechanic didn't argue. He had learned that arguing with Crane was like arguing with a wall. The wall never moved, and you just ended up with a sore head. "So here's what's going to happen," Crane continued, tapping his clipboard. "I'm letting you go, effective immediately. I'll pay you what I owe you, but I need you to clear out your toolbox and leave the property within the hour." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The mechanic looked at Crane's face. He saw no anger, no regret, just cold calculation. This wasn't personal to Crane. It was just business. A number on a spreadsheet that needed to be moved from one column to another. The mechanic nodded slowly. He didn't beg. He didn't threaten. He didn't even raise his voice. He just said, "I'll need my final check." Crane handed it to him. He had already printed it. He had planned this. The mechanic walked back to his toolbox. He opened the metal drawers one by one. He took out wrenches, sockets, screwdrivers, a torque wrench his wife had given him for their 5th anniversary. He placed each tool carefully into his old black bag. The other 2 workers in the hangar watched from a distance. They didn't say anything. They couldn't. They needed their own jobs. 10 minutes later, the mechanic walked out of the hangar for the last time. The morning sun felt warm on his face. He put his bag in the back of his old pickup truck and climbed into the driver's seat. Before he started the engine, he pulled out his phone and called his mother. "Ma," he said, his voice steady. "I'm coming to get Layla early. Something came up at work." His mother didn't ask questions. She just said, "Okay, baby. She's eating her cereal. I'll have her ready." He hung up and sat there for a moment, staring at the hangar. He thought about all the hours he had spent under those lights, all the planes he had saved, all the pilots who had shaken his hand and said, "Thanks for keeping me safe." Then he turned the key, and the truck rumbled to life. He drove down the dusty road, heading toward his mother's house. He didn't look back. Behind him, back in the office, Crane was already on the phone with a temp agency, asking for a cheap mechanic who could start tomorrow. He felt good. He felt in control. He had solved a problem. What he didn't know was that somewhere in the sky, 40 minutes away, a helicopter was already lifting off, and it was heading straight for his airfield. But that story would begin in less than an hour. For now, all that mattered was the empty hangar, the silent toolbox, and the quiet man driving away with his little girl waiting for him up the road. The owner stood by the window of his small office, watching the old pickup truck kick up dust as it disappeared down the gravel road. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He felt light, almost relieved. The problem was gone. The stubborn mechanic who always said no to everything was finally someone else's headache. He walked back to his desk and sat down with a satisfied sigh. He opened his laptop and started typing an email to a temp agency. "Need a replacement mechanic as soon as possible," he wrote. "Must work fast. No unnecessary delays." He hit send and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in weeks, the numbers in his head made sense again. Lower labor costs, faster turnaround, more profit. The 2 younger workers in the hangar exchanged quiet looks as they finished fueling a small private plane. They didn't say much. They couldn't. Both of them had families to feed, but they felt the weight of what had just happened. The mechanic they had learned from, the man who had taught them how to listen to an engine like it was a living thing, was gone, and the hangar already felt colder without him. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The owner poured himself a cup of coffee and watched the clock. He was already planning the rest of his week. Maybe he would go home early. Maybe he would take his wife out to dinner. Life was good. Then the radio crackled. It was the small air-to-ground radio on the corner of his desk. He rarely used it. Most pilots called ahead on their cell phones these days. But the radio was still there, old and dusty, connected to a low antenna on the roof of the hangar. "Airfield, this is Medevac 7. Do you copy? Over." The owner picked up the receiver. "This is the airfield. Go ahead. Medevac 7 requesting emergency landing clearance. We have a federal inspector on board. Priority 1. Repeat, Priority 1. We are 8 minutes out." The owner's smile faded. Priority 1 meant something serious. Medevac helicopters didn't just show up unannounced unless there was trouble. He cleared his throat and said, "Cleared for landing. Runway 2 is open." He stood up and walked to the hangar door. The 2 workers looked at him, confused. He didn't explain. He just stood there with his arms crossed, staring at the sky. 6 minutes later, he heard the sound. At first, it was just a low thumping in the distance, like a drumbeat growing louder. Then the helicopter appeared over the row of pine trees at the edge of the property. It was a twin-engine machine, white with a red cross on the side. It came in fast, much faster than most pilots would dare. The pilot knew what he was doing. The helicopter touched down hard on the tarmac, kicking up a cloud of dust and small stones. The rotors were still spinning when the side door slid open. A woman jumped out before the skids had fully settled. She was in her early 40s, wearing a dark blue flight suit and heavy boots. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face was all business. She carried a tablet in one hand and a small leather bag in the other. She didn't wait to be invited. She walked straight toward the hangar, ducking under the spinning rotor blades without flinching. The owner stepped out to meet her, but she didn't slow down. She walked right past him and into his office like she owned the place. Close the door, she said. It wasn't a request. The owner closed the door. He stood there, suddenly aware that his heart was beating faster than it should be. What's this about? He asked. The woman didn't sit down. She held up her tablet and turned it so he could see the screen. On it was a photo of a metal part, a small bracket with a series of hairline cracks visible under some kind of blue light. Do you know what this is? She asked. The owner squinted. Some kind of engine part. It's a rotor blade grip from a medevac helicopter, she said. It holds the main rotor blade to the hub. If this fails in flight, the blade detaches. The helicopter falls out of the sky. Everyone on board dies. Do you understand? The owner nodded slowly. His mouth felt dry. This part came from a helicopter in our fleet, the inspector continued. We run advanced stress skin tests every 6 months. The machine flagged this part as unsafe. That's not the problem. The problem is that our regulations require a second signature from a certified specialist before we can ground the aircraft or replace the part. And that specialist, she tapped the screen, is your mechanic. The owner blinked. My mechanic? The man who worked in this hangar. The one with the advanced certification in composite materials and ultrasonic scanning. There are only 12 people in this state with that credential. He's the only one within 200 miles of our base. And right now, his signature is the difference between 3 helicopters flying or staying on the ground. The owner felt the floor shift underneath him. I didn't know he had that certification. That's because you never asked, the inspector said sharply. She set the tablet down on his desk. Here's the situation. We have a medevac helicopter grounded at a hospital right now because this part failed to scan. We have 2 more that need inspection before they can fly again. Without your mechanic's signature, those helicopters are legally dead. No takeoffs, no patient transports, no emergency responses. Do you understand what that means for the rural communities we serve? The owner understood. He thought about the accident victims, the heart attack patients, the premature babies who needed to be flown to bigger hospitals. He thought about the families waiting by the phone, and he realized, for the first time, that his decision to save a few dollars might have cost lives. Where is he? The inspector demanded. The owner's voice came out smaller than he wanted it to. I fired him. About an hour ago. The inspector stared at him. For a long 3 seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. Tell me you're joking. I'm not joking. She opened her eyes and pointed a finger at his chest. You have 2 hours to find him and bring him back. 2 hours. If you don't, I will personally file a report that shuts down this entire airfield. No planes in. No planes out. Not until the FAA completes a full safety audit. And let me tell you, she said, her voice low and cold, that audit will take months. Maybe longer. Your business will be finished by the time it's done. The owner felt the blood drain from his face. He looked out the window at the helicopter sitting on his tarmac, rotors still turning. He looked at the hangar, at the planes waiting for service, at the 2 workers pretending not to listen. Then he looked back at the inspector. I'll find him, he said. I swear. I'll find him. You'd better, she said. She picked up her tablet and walked to the door. I'll be waiting in the helicopter. Don't make me wait long. She walked out, boots crunching on the gravel. The owner stood alone in his office, heart pounding. He picked up his phone and scrolled to the mechanic's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. He had fired a good man less than an hour ago. Now that same man was the only person who could save him. He took a deep breath and pressed call. The phone rang 4 times. The owner paced back and forth in his small office, gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. Outside, the helicopter sat on the tarmac with its rotors slowly winding down. The inspector stood beside it, arms crossed, watching the hangar like a hawk. On the 5th ring, a man's voice answered. Hello. The owner almost dropped the phone. It was the mechanic. He sounded calm, maybe a little tired, but not angry. Not yet. It's me, the owner said. His voice came out shaky. He cleared his throat and tried again. It's Crane. From the airfield. A long pause. Then the mechanic said, I know who you are. Look, I need you to come back. Right now. There's a federal inspector here. She says she needs your signature on some helicopter part. Something about a stress scan. She says you're the only one who can do it. Another pause. The owner could hear a child's voice in the background, asking a question about a drawing. The mechanic mumbled something away from the phone, then came back. You fired me, the mechanic said. An hour ago. You told me to clear out, and never come back. I know. I was wrong. I'm sorry. The words felt strange in the owner's mouth. He wasn't used to saying them. But this is serious. She says 3 medevac helicopters are grounded. People could die. The mechanic was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where are you?" "At the airfield." "She's waiting in the helicopter." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, the mechanic said. "But I'm not coming back as your employee. We'll talk about terms when I get there." He hung up before the owner could answer. The owner walked outside and told the inspector that the mechanic was on his way. She nodded once and climbed back into the helicopter to wait. The 2 workers in the hangar pretended to sweep the floor, but they had heard everything. One of them whispered to the other, "He's coming back?" The other just smiled and shook his head in disbelief. 22 minutes later, the old pickup truck appeared on the gravel road. It pulled up next to the helicopter. The mechanic stepped out, wearing the same stained work shirt he had on that morning. But something was different. He moved slower, more deliberately. He wasn't rushing for anyone anymore. The owner met him at the hangar door. The mechanic looked him straight in the eye and said, "Before I do anything, we need to talk." They walked into the office. The mechanic didn't sit down. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. The owner stood behind his desk, suddenly feeling very small. "Here's how this works," the mechanic said. "I'm not your employee anymore. I'm a consultant. My rate is triple what you were paying me. I want it up front, cash or certified check, before I touch a single tool. And I want a written agreement that you won't try to fire me again or retaliate in any way. My lawyer will write it up. You'll sign it." The owner opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He thought about the inspector waiting outside. He thought about the shutdown order hanging over his head. He thought about the months of lost business and the pilots who would never come back. "Fine," he said. "Triple rate. Up front. Written agreement. Just get it done." The mechanic nodded. "One more thing," he said. "From now on, safety comes first. No more cutting corners. No more skipping inspections. If I say a plane doesn't fly, it doesn't fly. No arguments. No meetings about numbers. You don't like it, find another mechanic. But we both know there isn't one." The owner swallowed hard. "Agreed." The mechanic pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. "I already had my lawyer write up the basics. Sign here." He handed the owner a pen. The owner read the paper quickly. It was short and clear. No hidden traps. Just the facts. He signed at the bottom and pushed the paper back across the desk. Then he wrote a check for triple the mechanic's old weekly rate and handed it over. The mechanic folded the check into his shirt pocket without looking at it. Then he walked out of the office and toward the helicopter. The inspector climbed down from the helicopter as he approached. She didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed a little. "You're the specialist?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the mechanic said. "Show me the part." She pulled the faulty rotor blade grip from a padded case inside the helicopter. It was a curved piece of metal about the size of a man's hand, with a series of tiny cracks visible under a special light. The mechanic turned it over slowly, running his thumb along the edge. He didn't need a machine to tell him what was wrong. He could feel it. "This is bad," he said quietly. "You were right to ground it." The inspector handed him a tablet with the scan results. The mechanic studied the numbers, nodding to himself. Then he pulled a small ultrasonic device from his own toolbox, the same toolbox he had packed up that morning. He hadn't left it at the hangar. He had taken it with him, like he always did. He knew his tools were his own. For the next 45 minutes, the mechanic worked in silence. He scanned the part again. He compared the results to the manufacturer's specifications. He filled out 3 different forms on the inspector's tablet, signing each one with a steady hand. The owner watched from the office window, not daring to come outside. The 2 workers stood at a respectful distance, handing the mechanic tools when he asked for them. Finally, the mechanic stood up and handed the tablet back to the inspector. "It's done," he said. "The part needs to be replaced. I've noted that in the report. But the other 2 helicopters in your fleet are safe to fly. I've cleared them pending a full inspection next week." The inspector read through his notes on the tablet. Her face softened for the first time all day. "Thank you," she said. "You just kept a lot of people alive." The mechanic shrugged. "It's my job." The inspector climbed back into the helicopter. The engine started, and the rotors began to turn. Before she pulled the door closed, she looked at the owner standing in the hangar doorway. She didn't say a word. She just pointed 2 fingers at her own eyes, then pointed them at him. "I'm watching you." Then the door slid shut, and the helicopter lifted off into the late afternoon sky. The mechanic stood on the tarmac, watching until the helicopter was just a small dot above the trees. Then he turned and walked toward his truck. The owner hurried outside, waving his arms. "Wait," the owner called out. "You're leaving again? What about the planes? What about tomorrow?" The mechanic stopped and turned around. He looked tired, but there was something else in his eyes. Not anger, just quiet certainty. "I'll be back tomorrow morning at 6, he said. "I'll do the oil changes and the engine diagnostic. I'll do the rotor inspection on the hospital helicopter. I'll do my job the way I've always done it. But remember what you signed. Safety first. No exceptions." The owner nodded quickly. "Of course, no exceptions." The mechanic studied his face for a long moment, searching for the lie. He didn't find one. Not today, anyway. He got into his truck and drove to his mother's house. His little girl was sitting on the front steps, coloring in a notebook. She looked up when he pulled into the driveway and ran to meet him. "Daddy, you came back early again," she said, wrapping her arms around his legs. He picked her up and held her close. "I sure did, sweetheart," he said. "And tomorrow, I'm going back to work. But tonight, we're making pizza. Just you and me." She cheered and squirmed to be put down, then ran inside to tell her grandmother the good news. The mechanic stood in the driveway for a moment, looking up at the sky. The helicopter was long gone. The sun was setting, painting the clouds orange and pink. He thought about the day he had lost his job, then gotten it back on his own terms. He thought about the owner, standing alone in his empty hangar, finally understanding what it meant to need someone. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel angry. He just felt tired and thankful and ready to go inside and be a father for the rest of the night. The airfield would still be there in the morning, and so would he.